All right, so today we're doing a deep dive into Tkinter, right? But specifically, we're going to be looking at how to grab user input, without making our code a total mess. Because
Right.
who wants that?
Nobody, and thankfully there's a really elegant way to do this in Tkinter.
Exactly. That's what we're talking about, Simple Dialog. And we're using a tutorial from plus2net.com as our guide. They always have those super practical examples. So for those already familiar with the basics of Tkinter, picture this. You want a quick and painless way to ask the user for a piece of information, right? Could be anything, their name, a number, you name it. Well, that's where Simple Dialog swoops in to save the day.
It's true. It's a lifesaver. It makes creating those little dialog boxes that pop up for user input, the kind you see in almost every application. It makes it so straightforward.
Right. Way simpler than coding all that from scratch. And the tutorial jumps right in, gives a clear example with Ask and Teacher.
Oh, Tkinter. Yeah, a classic. So clear, even for a beginner, which is great. It does exactly what the name suggests. It asks the user for an integer. I don't know if you remember, but when I was first starting out with Tkinter, figuring out how to get user input, it felt like I was navigating through a maze, honestly. Discovering Simple Dialog was like a breath of fresh air.
You and me both. It doesn't stop at integers, right?
Yeah.
The tutorial also covers how Simple Dialog handles other data types like floats and strings.
Yeah, absolutely. Need to get a price for something. Ask float is your go-to function. Need a name. Or like a secret code word even. Ask string has got you covered. It's actually surprisingly versatile for such a, compact tool.
Okay, yeah. Can you walk us through how those other data types work? Because Plus2Net, like I said, they always have those really helpful examples, so let's bring this to life a little bit.
Sure, let's do it. So let's start with ask float, okay? It's very similar to ask integer, but instead of expecting like a whole number, it's ready for those decimals, Perfect for things like prices, measurements, or anything else that needs that extra bit of precision.
Makes total sense.
Yeah.
Now, what about ask string? What makes asking for a string so unique? It seems pretty straightforward.
See, this is where things get kind of subtle. Ask string, it treats whatever the user enters as text. So even if they type in 123, Simple Dialog takes it as a string, not a number. It's a small but really important distinction. A lot of beginner teacher tutorials miss that. But, Simple Dialog really helps you avoid those gotchas.
So even if it looks like a number, Simple Dialog is saying, nope, I see this as text just like you asked me to. That's huge for stuff like zip codes, right? You wouldn't want to accidentally do math on someone's zip code.
Exactly. Or even something like phone numbers. You want to keep those digits in their original format. So even though it might seem like a minor detail, it's one of the ways Simple Dialog helps you write, more robust code from the very beginning.
Okay, that's super helpful. Now, one thing that jumped out at me in the tutorial was how Simple Dialog handles this data validation aspect. It's like it has this built-in bodyguard for your code, making sure nothing fishy sneaks in.
Oh, absolutely. And that's one of the things I really appreciate about it. It takes care of making sure that users enter the right data type. For example, let's say you're using AskFloat to get a price, and the user decides to type in, like, banana.
Hold on. Who's out there trying to pay for their bananas with other bananas? What kind of barter system is this?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
But you see my point, right? So with Simple Dialog, instead of your whole program crashing, it just says, nope, sorry, that's not a valid price. Much more elegant than your entire application just coming to a screeching halt because someone typed in the wrong thing.
So not only does Simple Dialog keep our code safe, but it also keeps things feeling, well, elegant, right? Visually elegant even, because the tutorial shows how to display the entered string in a label, which is super user-friendly.
Yes, exactly. Visual feedback is key for good UX design, right? Imagine asking a user for their username. It's reassuring for them to actually see that name pop up somewhere on the interface, confirming that their input was received. And the tutorial breaks down exactly how to do this. It uses a variable to store whatever the user types into the dialog box and then updates a label on the main window using that information. It's such a simple concept, but a very powerful way to close the loop with the user.
Right. It's all about that confirmation. It's like a little nod from the app saying, hey, we heard you. But here's a question. What happens if the user hesitates right at the last second and hits cancel instead of OK? Does that throw our code into a blender?
Well, that's where Simple Dialog really shines, I think.
Okay.
It's ready for all those what-if scenarios.
Right.
Like if the user clicks that cancel button, it returns none. It's like it's saying, look, no input here, but don't worry, I got this.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah.
So it's not just about getting the info. It's about knowing how to deal with not getting the info.
Exactly.
That's really cool.
And the best part is, the tutorial actually gives you the code to check for that none value.
Oh, nice.
It's really just a simple if statement,
Okay.
basically checking to see if what you got back was none.
Makes sense.
And that can prevent, honestly, a whole bunch of potential problems and errors in your code.
So it's like a backup plan in case the user changes their mind.
Exactly.
Love it. This tutorial is really thorough. I'm impressed.
Yeah.
There's one more thing I wanted to touch on.
Okay.
It really grabbed my attention, this idea of having the dialog box open up when a specific widget has focus.
Right.
That just seems super powerful.
Yeah.
And maybe a little mysterious, too.
It is.
Can you kind of break that down for us?
Of course.
Like, what's going on there?
So this is where you start to see how deep Tkinter really goes. So picture this. You've got this button in your app, right? And whenever it's in focus, and by that I mean selected, either by, the user clicking on it or tabbing over to it, boom, a simple dialog pops up, ready to take some input.
Okay, that's already super cool.
Yeah.
But how does it actually work? What's the magic behind the scenes?
Well, Tkinter has this really cool feature. It's called event binding.
Okay.
And you're essentially telling your application, whenever this specific event happens, like button click or a widget coming into focus, then do this piece of code.
Okay, I think I'm following.
Yeah.
But maybe for those who are still getting a handle on Tkinter, can we just rewind a little?
Of course.
What exactly is a widget in this context?
Oh, for sure. So in Tkinter, a widget is any element of your graphical interface.
Okay.
Buttons, text boxes, labels, drop-down menus, these are all widgets.
Got it.
And each of these widgets, they can actually trigger events.
Okay.
And you can write code that's designed to respond to those specific events.
Ah, so it's like each of these widgets has like these invisible tripwires.
Yeah, yeah.
And when you trigger one, like clicking a button,
Right.
it sets off this whole chain reaction in the code.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
Okay.
That's exactly what's happening.
Cool.
And in this case, the code we're talking about is the code that makes our little SimpleDialog friend pop up.
Okay, that's starting to click for me.
Cool.
So it's not just about like the dialog box just appearing out of nowhere.
Yeah.
It's about weaving it into the way the application's interface works.
You got it.
Like how it all flows together.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that's really where the power of event binding shines, You can create these really dynamic and interactive user experiences just by linking SimpleDialog to these different widgets and events.
Yeah, this is making me think of all sorts of possibilities.
It is, yeah.
But before we get too carried away,
Right.
I think we should address the elephant in the room, or maybe like the slightly smaller, less intimidating elephant.
Okay, what elephant?
The tutorial does mention that SimpleDialog has its limitations.
Right. It does.
And we've seen how useful it is.
Sure.
But when is it not the right tool for the job?
Yeah.
So the tutorial wraps up with some really interesting questions, and there's one in particular that stood out to me. It asks, what are the limitations of using the SimpleDialog module for these complex user interactions in a Tkinter application? So basically, when shouldn't we be using SimpleDialog? When do we need something a bit, more heavy-duty?
That's a great question to consider. SimpleDialog is great. It's elegant for quick and clean input. But if you're trying to build like an elaborate form or you need those multi-step interactions, imagine a form with drop-down menus, checkboxes, radio buttons, that sort of thing. Or maybe you need some more complex validation rules. Let's say you're asking for a password, for example. You might want to make sure it follows certain criteria, right?
But like your password needs at least one uppercase letter, one lowercase letter, a number, a special character, and the secret to eternal life.
Exactly. So for those more complex scenarios, SimpleDialog might not be the best tool. Think of it like the express lane at the grocery store. Perfect if you just need to grab a couple of things. But not so much if you're doing a huge shopping trip and need everything from the bakery to the produce section.
Okay, that's a perfect analogy. So for our listeners out there who are ready to build those more complex Tkinter applications, maybe even the ones with those slightly unreasonable password requirements, what are the key takeaways from our SimpleDialog deep dive?
Well, first and foremost, remember to embrace the simplicity and the power of SimpleDialog for that streamlined user input. It's your go-to for just grabbing a single value, whether that's an integer, a float, or a string, without needing to write tons and tons of code.
Short and sweet, right.
Exactly. Second, pay attention to those details, understanding how each of those simple dialog functions handles different data types and how to make sure your input is valid. That's going to save you a lot of headaches down the road. It's all about setting yourself up for success.
It's true. Those little details can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. And finally, don't be afraid to experiment, right? Tkinter has so much to offer. It's a really versatile toolkit. So as you get comfortable with things like simple dialogue, don't hesitate to try out some of the more advanced features. See what you can build.
Experimentation is where the real magic happens. And on that note, we'll leave you with this little thought. Think about the applications you use every day. How many of them do you think are probably using something like simple dialogue behind the scenes? It's probably more than you realize. Until next time, happy coding, everyone.